towards the end of your commentary career, Mikey, obviously there was, your famous impassioned speech in 2020. I think it was the year before you stopped, wasn't it? In the wake of the George Floyd murder. And a lot of people at that time, a lot of sports broadcasters were doing something similar or reacting. But I think the way that you did it and the way that you enunciate it was so brilliant and so clear, and the way that you clearly thought about it, it became, obviously a really watched segment of the broadcast and was held up as a sort of, one of the great speeches on the matter. Did you ever think it would have such a powerful reaction when you made that speech?
Not really, no, Matt. When I did what I did, I knew that there would be some sort of backlash, because I know a lot of people wouldn't be very happy with it. A lot of people don't like to face the truth. They don't like to hear the truth. But before we even go into that, I must commend Sky and Hendo in particular, Brian Henderson, because he was the person behind it. Of course, if his bosses had told him that he couldn't do it, he wouldn't have been able to do it. But he was the person behind the entire thing. I wasn't even yet in England when I got a call from Hendo, because if you remember, it was COVID days, and we weren't even sure that we were going to have cricket in England. And Hendo called me here in Cayman and said, Mikey, we just had a Zoom meeting with the cricket staff. Again, Zoom, because they couldn't all get together. And Ebony Rainford Brent had just joined the staff. And of course, Hendo asked her about why she had gone on the Black Lives Matter march and her experiences in England. And Hendo said she broke down in that Zoom meeting. She started to cry. And she's not as emotional as me. I cry easily. She broke down because of her experiences. And Hendo said, we can't have somebody on staff that this has affected so much, and we just let it lie. And he called me and said, this is what we are planning to do. We are planning to interview Ebony, talk about her experiences, let her talk about her experiences and this entire Black Lives Matter thing. And we're wondering if you would do the same. I said, absolutely, Hendo. I would be glad to do an interview and to talk about the entire issue. So when I eventually got there, as you know, the series didn't start till July because of the COVID and not knowing exactly what was going on. They did the interview. They came to my house. I had to quarantine first, of course. And then Sky sent who was it that they sent again? Anyway, they sent a crew to do the interview at home. I did that interview. It was edited, of course, because, you can't put everything out on here. And it was supposed to be shown at lunchtime on day one of the first test down at AGS Bowl. With the weather around, Hendo decided that he would do it before the game started, because we weren't absolutely sure we would start on time. If we were going to start on time, it would have just been the interviews and move on to the game. But because by the time the interviews with Eds and myself were completed, it started to rain and drizzle, and we knew we would not start on time, Hendo then decided to expand on it. And he told Wardy, you're going to have Mikey up with you in the wet area, as they call it, in the wet rangers special area that you go to. Ebony will be in the commentary box, and we're going to have a three-way, and again, NASA is there as well. So we'll have a four-way go at this thing. So when Wardy turned to me and asked me the question, what it was like looking down into the camera and talking about it, I was ready. All this was in my head from years ago. The treatment of black people and people of color in general all over the world. It was in my head from years ago. So it wasn't something I had to go and research and study. I researched for my book later on because I had to add a lot more. But this is something that I was living. So when it came out like that, it wasn't difficult. It's as a matter of fact, afterwards told me, Mikey, you spoke for almost four minutes non-stop. I didn't have a clue.
Really?
I just kept on talking, and I could have gone on much longer, but then I started to get a little bit emotional, and Wardy saw that and broke off from me and brought in NASA because he realized it's the position I was getting myself into. But, even at the end of it, I thought to myself, well, I've said what I have to say. Some people won't like it because, as I said, not everyone likes to hear the truth, but it will impact some people the way I want it to impact them in a positive way. So let us see how things go from here. That was where I intended to stop. Again, it was Ward who came to me and told me, you can't stop. You know, this, you have to continue with this thing. We have to push further. And that's how the book came about. Of course, the ghostwriter, Ed Hawkins, was adamant that we should do a book as well. And that's how the book came about.
Mike, yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you the question, you know, what were the days leading up to that, you know, to that interview, to that piece? Because, you know, I think people think that this thing just happens, but there's a lot of build-up. But I think you've answered that, well, you've talked about that pretty eloquently there. I think there's a part of me listening to that and the support, like, I'm very happy that the support that you received, you know, from media and Sky and that. And there's a part of that, me listening to that saddens me and upsets me a little bit, because I felt like, you know, I wasn't afforded when I spoke out the similar support from, you know, from the very, very same people, which, you know, which makes me ask the question, is it, you know, when it comes to discrimination, is it, you know, dependent on how successful you've been as a cricketer? You know, is there different ways, you know, is there, you know, anti-black racism, Islamophobia? Is, you know, what is it that, you know, got the same people support you in such a big way? Yet I felt like, you know, I was pretty much, you know, left to the side.
Azeem, I don't know. Maybe if I had done what I did for Sky when I was a player, I would have gotten the same thing that you got. You know, I sort of rejection and what is he talking about and that sort of thing. Perhaps because I said what I said so much later in life, when and gave so many examples of exactly what life was like for someone of color. They couldn't really refute it. You know, the facts are facts, Azeem. You know, they can dispute whatever you are saying and whatever you said, somebody said. But when you talk about facts that are in a newspaper or in magazines or in real life and reported on by news networks, they can't refute that. They can't refute those things. Those are facts. Those are things that you can't defend them. They are there. People who don't want to believe what you said, Azeem, will try and find ways of going around it and say, oh, it's his word against this other person's word and that sort of thing, because they don't want to believe it. But they have to believe the facts. I didn't just bring up things that people were talking about. I gave examples and I told them where to find it. I gave them studies that Yale University had done. I gave them articles from newspapers. Go and Google it. And as I said, you can use other search engines. But go and look them up. These are facts. You can't refute facts. And as my book was printed 2021, about May or June 2021, it was published. No one has been able to go into that book and take one thing out of it and try and ridicule it and say, oh, you know, this is rubbish. Facts are facts. You like them or not, they are there. There were things that were taken out of the book as well, because there were things that were a little bit harsher than what we wanted them to be. And we didn't really want to cause, I didn't want it to be too cantankerous then. We didn't want people to be reading the book, although some people read the book and still were hurt by it and felt embarrassed by it. But we didn't want it to go beyond that. I don't mind a white person reading the book and feeling embarrassed, because if you don't feel embarrassed about what you see in that book, that means you're happy with what you saw in the book. You're okay with it. And if you're okay with it, you're part of the problem. So if you feel uncomfortable about it, I don't have a problem with you feeling uncomfortable, because you should. If you don't feel uncomfortable, as I said, something is wrong with you. But some of it was going a bit too far. We had even some pictures, some horrible pictures of what they did to slaves in the USA. And we didn't use them at all. As you notice, the book has absolutely no pictures. Because if you put one, you have to put more. Absolutely no pictures in the book. But it didn't take very long, and the publishers were very happy with it. We got a fantastic legal report on the book. As a matter of fact, the person that did the legal report on the book recommended that this book should be going into schools. And this is a white person who did the legal report on this book. This book should be on the curriculum in schools because he was so impressed with what he had read in the book, because a lot of it is not readily known. A lot of people are not aware of so many things. I wasn't aware of a lot of things in that book until I started to do the research. But people must be educated on this matter. If they are not educated on the matter, they will not get better. The world will not get better. Because a lot of people out there are uneducated on the matter, and people will say, oh, they are racist. They are not necessarily racist. They just don't know. A lot of things I was told and taught as a young man growing up, Azeem and Matt, I found them out to be lies. Who could ever think? And I thought this up into my 40s, because it gets into your head and you don't think about it. This is what you are told. This is what is portrayed. Every movie you go to, every book you read, everything you see, this is what it is, how it is portrayed. Who could ever think, Azeem, you're not Christian, but I was brought up in a Christian household, and they were told Jesus Christ is a white man with blonde hair and blue eyes. Absolute rubbish. How could it be coming from that part of the world at that time in history? But this is what they want to push on you. They push this into your brain, brainwash you, because they want you to think that that is the ideal. When other people think that way, you cannot blame them. Don't blame me for thinking that way for so many years, because that's what I was taught, that's what I was told. So when other people think a particular way because of their ignorance, don't blame them. Educate them. If they don't want to be educated, that's their problem. They can be pushed to the margins if they don't want to be educated and come to the real world. But do not blame them unless they reject education.
Yeah, it's fascinating you say all that stuff. And you mentioned there about feeling uncomfortable if you're a white person reading the book and listening to those words. Do you think that unconscious bias is as dangerous as open racism? Because you don't see open, obvious racism that often.
Yeah, well, most of it is unconscious bias, Matt. As I said, a lot of people are growing up in societies that teach them certain things, and they don't know that it is wrong unless they are taught something different. Their eyes are open to other aspects of life. So they believe that what they are thinking and what they are seeing and in their minds, that is just the world, how it is. So a lot of it is unconscious. You have some people out there that you can't help. They are just, you're going to find racists out there that you cannot help. That's just the way they are, and they don't want to know anything else. But a lot of people out there do not know that their thoughts are wrong, that they were brainwashed into thinking a certain way, and they were brainwashed wrongly. They didn't learn the truth. How many people in this world believe in the hierarchical system of mankind? White man on top, the black man at the bottom. That was what was taught. It's all in the book, going back a long while. You know that race, mankind has been on earth for thousands of years. Race was not a topic until about 500 years ago. Nobody thought of race or thought of anything color until about 500 years ago. And you know why? Because they wanted to create this system where they could put certain people in certain positions and then victimize others that they thought were below them. It is easy for you to victimize and to terrorize and to kill people that you think are below you. They are not as good as you, so you can do whatever you want. We have seen it throughout history. We saw it in Europe with Hitler and Nazis and the Jews. What the description, the rats, the termite, whatever. It is easy to categorize people as subhuman and then treat them whatever way you want. It's happening right now in Palestine. Categorize them as subhuman. Then you can do whatever you want without feeling guilty. It has happened throughout history. And that was done because they wanted to make sure that when they were terrorizing certain people and when they were taking advantage of certain people and taking out the riches out of Africa, it wasn't something that they would consciously think they were doing wrong.
You can't run past this stuff because it'll keep coming back. It'll keep coming back, and it'll just change. It'll change a little bit. You know, in the 70s, they were being murdered and violence. You know, petrol bomb through letterboxes. Now it's more institutional through workplaces. You know, a bit more covert. But it'll just change, and for it to completely go, which I don't think is realistic, but for it to get as well as it can be, I think we need to be braver in getting together on one table and have them conversations.
The thing is, Azeem, as I said, divide and conquer. That has been going on for a long while. That's why the hierarchical system was created by those who wanted to conquer and those who want to terrorize and who want to victimize. But what we also have to recognize is that something that has been going on for hundreds of years is not going to change in one lifetime. As I said on Sky, I don't expect to live to see equality. I ain't going to see it. But what I'm hoping is that we'll get constant change in the right direction. And as you just noted, things have changed. They no longer throw petrol bombs at your house or look at you straight in your face on the subway and tell you whatever they want to tell you. Things are changing. And it will be a gradual change. It ain't going to happen overnight. And we have to accept that. And as you said, some people won't change. But hopefully we can push them into the margins. And those who are willing to learn and willing to accept that the world has to be a better place, we will all get together. And it will be a better place. But it will take time. It ain't going to happen overnight. And on that same point in the book, when I was talking to Adam Goods in Australia, and he made the comment to some of his elders, he spoke about it and I wrote about it. He made the comment to some of his elders that nothing is changing in Australia for the indigenous people. And his elders said to him, Adam, no, you can't say that. You've got to remember where we are coming from. It's not just where we are, but where we are coming from. It wasn't until the 1960s that indigenous people in Australia were counted in the census. Before that, they were fauna and flora. They weren't people. Now, today, indigenous people in Australia are able to go to universities. They have businesses and the governments. I'm not too sure I should say governments because I think the different states might have different laws or different ways that they operate. But government contracts in Australia, when they are put out to bid, a certain percentage have got to go to companies owned by indigenous people. That's coming somewhere from not being even counted in the census. So it's a slow process, but we can only hope. And again, your grandchild might see it. I won't see it. My grandchild might see it as well. It coming closer together where people are more accepting of each other. And we go back to what it was before 500 years ago when people were just people. People used to refer to people as where they came from, not their race or their color. You're a Macedonian or you're a whatever. Today, you are a black man or a white man or an Asian or a child. No, we have to get back to just people being people. But again, as I said, we won't see it.
Is it also important, Mikey, that, you know, we keep the pressure on here? Because I kind of detect that with racism in cricket and in other fields as well, that the powers that be, you know, they can be very hot on it for a while, but then just lose interest a little bit when it's not front and center of the news anymore.
Yeah, it's all over the world. It's not just in the UK, in the US as well. It's pretty much now on the back burner. And you hear people talking now, oh, Black Lives Matter movement, it was something terrible. Why was the Black Lives Matter movement terrible? We hear people in the US talking about, oh, they should have set the police on the protesters of Black Lives Matter. All of a sudden, being with Black Lives Matter movement or demonstrating with the Black Lives Matter movement, that is now become a sin. You have to keep the pressure on. As I said, I think I said it once and I wrote about it in my book. I would take the knee until I am dead, or until it no longer is seen by anyone. If you're not in the limelight, if no one is seeing you, there's no point going down on your knee. But if people are seeing you, if you're a sportsman, if you're whatever, and the spotlight is on you and people are looking towards you, you have got to continue making people aware of the fact that you are not satisfied. We have made progress, but we haven't gotten there yet. We are not satisfied. We have to keep on doing what we are doing. As you said, the hierarchy, they are comfortable. They are happy. It doesn't matter if they are white or black or pink or purple. Those that are comfortable, not going to necessarily want to see change. If it comes along, some of them will say, okay, but they're not going to fight for it because they are comfortable. Privilege, there's something called white privilege. But apart from white privilege, there are other privileges. Other people have privileges that they're just happy with, and they say, okay, let's coast along. Although people will tell you on the specifics of white privilege, oh, nothing called white privilege. Let me give you a few examples of white privilege. I'll give you one that everybody can identify with immediately. And I'm going to call names because it's the truth. Anyone who followed John McEnroe's tennis career, could they imagine a black person doing what John McEnroe did on a tennis court and have as long a career as he did and also going into media afterwards? No chance. That's white privilege.
Yeah, he'd been in trouble.
So many other examples, but I'll just stick to that one.
Yeah, he'd been deemed a troublemaker if he was black.
Of course. Angry black man you'd be. But some people saw it as amusement. It was funny. His behavior on the tennis court, that's funny.
Yeah. I mean, I thought that reaction to the whole Black Lives Matter thing, taking the knee, I thought it said a lot about society, right? Because it was amazing how quickly it got flipped around from being this noble movement and then some elements of the media suddenly turning into some sort of terrorist organization, almost. Taking the knee. You had politicians here saying, I will never take the knee, but unless it's in front of my wife or something like that, and turning it into something that it wasn't. And I found that really quite shocking in some ways, the way that it was turned into this thing that it wasn't, and people booing it at football stadiums because of this narrative. I thought that said a lot about society.
And that's what I keep on telling people. I got it somebody contacted me sometime last year, or maybe it was the year before, that they were doing this documentary or this program and they wanted me to be involved about racism in cricket. And I said, no, I won't be involved in that. If you're going to do something about racism in society, I'll come and join you. But racism is not in cricket. Racism is not in football. Racism is not in golf. Racism is in society. If you clear it out of the society, you will not get it in any sport. And the people just don't want to grasp that. They want to put racism in a little box. It doesn't belong in a box. It's in the open society. People who play sport, people who administer sport, people who watch sport, they all come from the wider society. If the wider society did not have a problem, the sports themselves would not have a problem. So don't tell me about tackling racism in any particular sport.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's completely a society problem. The reason that the light is shining on cricket is that at least cricket is willing to do some research into it and try and shine the light on it. I think there are a lot of sports that don't even do that, are afraid to do that.
Yep.
I think on that, yeah, and I completely agree with you. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that, right, it's part of our society. I think it's about how you solve it and how you get to solutions. And I think sometimes I feel like, when people say, right, well, this is a societal problem, it's very much like, well, it's a societal problem, let society sort it out and we'll sort it out as well, as opposed to actually going, well, hold on a minute, what's my role in society? Where is my environment? Where do I operate? If I can sort of look after where I am in small spaces, if we can all sort of look after our own environments, our own part in society, then hopefully that'll mean that, in the wider society, things will get better. So I think absolutely right that this is a societal problem, but how we make sure we get the solution is also important. That we don't just say, "Oh, it's a societal problem," and then it's someone else's problem. I can't sort it out, type of thing. And I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, I'm not absolving administrators in different sports, Azeem. I'm not telling them that they will sit back and say, "Oh, it's not my problem." They have to try and sort out what is happening in their sports. But I'm talking about me as somebody in general in the society. Don't tell me because I was a cricketer, I must talk to you about racism in cricket. Sorry. I'll give you an example. South Africa during apartheid. If the cricketers, all manner of people in South Africa, were allowed to play cricket, black, white, pink, whatever, but at the end of the game, they went back to the same system outside of the playing arena, the apartheid system, how would that help anyone? So you have to make sure, yes, you want to try and sort out your little avenue, but it has to be then pushed out into the society. And unless the people who hold high offices in the society want to do something about it, you're not going to get a lot of change. And it appears to me that not too many who hold high offices want to do anything about it.
I agree with that.
Is it also very important how we approach, this whole thing and how we deal with racism? Because is there sometimes a bit of a grey area, and some people can kind of get swept up in this? And I'm thinking with cricket, for example, someone who we obviously know very well, Bumble, David Lloyd, right? And he ended up effectively, retiring, losing his job essentially as a commentator when he still was very loved and still a very good commentator, because he was caught up in this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't say anything that was racist per se, but because it was such a hot topic at the time, he was one of the casualties. And do we have to be careful about how we approach it, and not everything is racism, if you know what I mean? If we start sort of saying that this is racist, then it isn't necessarily. Does that not necessarily help the battle to get rid of racism, if you know what I mean?
It does create problems when we take this racism thing too far and label everything as being racist. Somebody mimicking an Indian accent or a Pakistani accent or a West Indian accent, these days people are going to say they are racist. I can't see that as being racist. Somebody trying to speak like me when I did commentary, am I going to say, a white person for instance, am I going to say he's being racist to try to sound like me? So you have to be careful where things like that are concerned. They say that the greatest form of flattery is what?
Imitation.
Exactly. Trying to imitate what you see or hear. That is great flattery. That is so how come now all of a sudden people want to call that being racist? I can't call that being racist. And people have to be very careful where that is concerned. You and I know Bumble. I have known Bumble for donkey's years. I met Bumble from the 70s. I would never ever think of Bumble as being a racist person. But at the same time, he might say something that isn't quite right because of, the environment and what people have been saying to him. And he might group people, for instance, from a particular country and say, this is what they like or this is what they don't like, which is not necessarily racist. It's just, what's the word I'm looking for? You just can't group people because of where they are from and say
generalization.
Yes. For instance, people used to come up to me, you're from Jamaica, you have any weed? Come on. Because I'm from Jamaica, I smoke weed. Jamaica perhaps has the best ganja in the world, who knows? But that doesn't mean because I'm from Jamaica I'm gonna have weed. And that is not being racist. That's just them generalizing and just being foolish. When I was doing my book thing, I was interviewed by a television station in India. And the young lady was trying to talk about racism and the way it is shown, and saying, you know, there was an Indian cricketer, I don't remember who it was, and some other cricketers, some white cricketers had a nickname for him. Say, for instance, his name was Amalik. They couldn't pronounce it, and they said, "Oh, Jimmy," and they were saying that's being racist. I said, no, you can't say that's being racist. This guy or these people perhaps cannot pronounce his name properly, so they try to find something that is easier for them to pronounce, and that person is even quite happy with that, with it being called that nickname. Mohinder Amarnath, for instance, in my time, Mohinder Amarnath, all of us could pronounce Mohinder Amarnath's name, all of us, but we still called him Jimmy because that was his nickname. No one could say we're being racist towards Mohinder Amarnath. He didn't think that either. And there are other names in Asia that are even more difficult for us West Indians or other people to pronounce. And a lot of people will find a nickname. Even West Indians have names that can be difficult to pronounce, and people call them nicknames because it's easier. But that's not being racist. And we have to be careful how far we go down with this racist argument as to what is racist and what isn't. Because if you start thinking that everything is racist, we'll never solve this problem. Because people will be afraid to even open their mouths. And if they are afraid to open their mouths, you cannot have conversations. And as Azeem said, we need conversations. Some of them might be uncomfortable conversations, but you need conversations, unless we'll go nowhere.
I think a couple of things for me, Matt, on this. I think there is the sort of the personal thing, and then there is the wider conversation that you guys have just had there about, you know, taking the fear out of conversation, which is very important. Ask the questions and stuff. I think it's, you know, obviously I was at the other end of Bumble stuff, and I've never really spoke about it in that much detail. But I think it's important that to say what, you know, he went out of his way to say things to random people when he didn't need to. You know, he doesn't know me. You know, he's covered games that I played in. He doesn't know me. He said some pretty personal things about me, which couldn't have come from him. That was one part. But then he went further and he generalized, you know, and said, so he didn't say racist things, but he said racial stereotypes. And that's, you know, there is a difference in that. You know, he did say racial stereotypes about, you know, South Asian people. And, you know, this has not come from someone that is, you know, played the game a little bit or that. This has come from, again, you know, someone that has been involved in the game at the top of the game at different roles for a very, very long time. So, you know, the fact that he was, you know, he felt enough to be able to put this in writing at the situation. I think it's important to go through this situation a little bit because there's a lot of misinformation out there. As I said, you know, this was sent, these messages was not sent to one people. I know it's been made out as like, oh, it was sent to one people, then forwarded to me. It was sent to several people. That was the first part of it. So I think it's important, you know, yes, there wasn't racist things, but there was racial stereotypes about South Asian people in there, which is completely and utterly unacceptable. That was the first part of it. I think the second part, which was the fact, when I said it at DCMS, I mean, you know, that hour and 45 changed my life. I didn't know what I was saying. You know, I was told to take notes in there. I said what was on my heart. For a year and a half, I'd been, you know, practically bombarded from all angles. You know, I know the effect that's had on my family, right? And, you know, the fact that I'm having to live abroad now for a large part of that. So there's, you know, there was a lot of things that happened that I have not spoken about. But when I spoke about it at DCMS, I received a phone call and a message straight away from Bumble. And I spoke to him. And, you know, we had a good chat. He apologized. And for me, that should have been the end. You know, that should have been the end. He apologized and he made some promises. Whether I believe the apology at the moment or not, I don't really know. But he apologized. And for me, I always said, all I ever wanted people to do is accept and apologize and let's work a way forward. What his employers did from there on, you know, what his employers did from there on is literally, you know, that's on them. And I think just like every other institution in this last 3 years, I think they got it wrong, right? I think they got it wrong because if the person who apologized, if they lose their job, you're actually basically encouraging no one else to accept their failings and apologize, right? There were those that didn't apologise, have never apologised, have continued, and they're fine. Yet the one person that apologised, lost their job. So I, absolutely agree that that was wrong. But then, where I am really uncomfortable with this is, after that apology, after what his employers did, he made a lot of promises. If he'd have followed through with them, it'd have been so powerful. And it would have actually gone to me, you know what, he genuinely meant it. Sadly and disappointingly, the reality is I still live with the consequences, all of that. The messages haven't stopped, Matt. Mikey, the messages haven't stopped. I've been sent messages recently. They've continued. They've not gone as far, but they've continued. And I see a lot of cricket, a lot of his friends, that he spent a lot of time with have gone out to bat for him. I can see that. I'm not naive to that fact. I can see that they are, worried about a friend. But, the reality is it's really important here that, I think cricket's portrayed him as the victim in all of this, and he's not. And I really want to emphasize on that. I think it's important. Yes, I will finish on the fact that I think his employers got it wrong, and that's where we've got to. But the actions were himself. But onto the other point about trying to create these safe spaces where you can have the conversations. I think that's really important because unless you have that, and I hope I've done this book, and I think it'll surprise a few people, to be honest, Matt. The reason it's taken as long as it has, it's because what I don't want people to read that book and go, God, I want to fight him again, because that's not why I spoke out. That's not why I spoke out. We haven't. I know everyone wants to portray us such because there's a lot of misinformation. We got to the car crash we got because of cricket leaders, because the leaders at Yorkshire, the leaders at the PCA, the leaders at ECB, right? And I absolutely feel for some people on the other side of this, because I'm a human being. I've been in a place where I've been close to taking my own life, and I don't want anyone to go through that. So I absolutely do have empathy and towards. I think some of them have not really had that same for me, but that's fine. So I think it's really important that hopefully at some point, instead of going right, we're going to chuck people to the side, because I'll be honest with you, as I feel right now, is cricket's basically gone right. The pressure's gone. He's the troublemaker. He's on the side, and actually, everyone that was actually caught doing the wrong things will bring him in. I can give you ample examples of that. I didn't really want to go into this, but I think it's important because I think you started off there with Matt with it's not racist. No, it's not racist. It's not the P word, but racial stereotypes and grouping a group of Asian players, in one and saying that, getting subs out of them is like getting blood out of stone is totally and utterly unacceptable. But that's my point. That's where it starts. Where does it end?
Yeah, no, I listen. You're totally right. You can't make general racial stereotypes like that. Well, I just think probably mine and Mikey's point is that you can't just sort of sweep everyone up in one bundle and say, look, this is black and this is white in terms of racism. There are like some grey areas, and I don't know what you guys think, but I do think that when you start doing that, and maybe Bumble's not a good example, but for example, when you start saying that someone imitating someone's accent is racist or something like that, then that's only going to cause more of a divide and cause more of an issue, because you kind of need people on board with it, you know what I mean, rather than them feeling like, if I do anything wrong, I'm going to be a racist. I'm either racist or I'm not racist. I think people have got to understand that it's not as simple as that.
Yeah, and I agree, and I agree with that. I think it's important that there is a place to get things wrong. We all make mistakes. You can get things wrong.